There's been a lot of buzz for the new One Piece live action show. I don't really care. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's why today I'm here to break down Nami's theme as we're used to it from the show and explain just how deep a few of these notes and sounds bring out the most in the character of Nami and her development. This video won't really spoil much about the show, definitely not anything past episode 40 or so. Even, what happens before then won't be talked about too heavily outside of some small things for context that I mentioned. The first time I'm aware of we hear Nami's theme is in episode 7, when we first hear something related to the burden that Nami carries related to her village. It's the first time that we as the audience and Luffy get a small glimpse into Nami's past, into the surface level things of what will become a long lasting friendship. When we first dive into the melody, the first thing to notice is the instrumentation. We have some string instruments, piano, and a synth playing the main melody on top. Some cool colors are going on with this instrumentation, especially with the synth instrument. Looking at the key, we're seemingly in G major, with a short vamp for the 2 chord and the 5 chord. We start off with a pickup on the 4th beat that gets repeated during the melody. It also centers the melody around a 2-note repetition with a short little melodic sail. After the first pickup, we're quickly encountered with this big interval leap of a perfect fifth, which immediately pulls your attention to this E, which is being restated in these first 3 melodic sails. It might only be one measure, but there essentially have been 3 different calls and responses, and it's always been related back to this E, which happens to be the 5th of this A minor, but becomes the 9th of the D7. Past the first 2 measures, these pickups land on the 5th also, just like the E and the A minor, relative to the chord. Along with them being on the same beat, they're landed on the same scale degree, which really solidifies already in the first 3 to 4 bars, a simple yet strong melody with a sweet spot of variation and repetition. This string ostinato also helps to fill up space between the pickups and to push the energy forward a bit to help make this section overall feel a bit more bouncy. We also have a very common progression on top of the melody in the key of G, 2, 5, 3, 6, which is a repeat of the first section. But instead of continuing to pick up on bar 4, we start a scale run from the end of 2, which leads us into the major 6. Which is such an unexpected shift at this point in the song, but it works. Let's examine a bit for why this works. Usually when playing a 2-5 progression, you'd move to the 1, but moving to the 6 is what we call a backdoor 2-5 in jazz. Essentially what this is a sneaky way for the composer to throw off our ears and to change the key without us noticing. Instead of this being a 2-5 like we usually hear it, it becomes a minor 4 major flat 7 in the key of E major. There's a couple different reasons for why this progression works, and the first one comes from just not trying to be too pedantic about it, but it just sounds good. Sometimes we think too much about the theory of things, but we forget that theory is just meant to explain the things that sound good. We don't use theory to create the music, and all I'm doing right now is just trying to explain what choices the composer made that he might have thought just simply sounded good. The other more analytical way comes from explaining it as an extension of the minor 4 with a D in the bass and a 6 on the top. This creates some very smooth voice leading, which is the root of many resolutions of these progressions. In a regular 5 to 1 progression, the 3 leads up to the 1 and the flat 7 leads down to the 3. But in this presumably minor 4 to 1 progression, the 1 leads into the 3 leads into the 5, and the 5 leads into the 7, which means essentially almost every chord tone of the minor 4 is being covered by a smooth, slick half-step movement, which is, just the smallest movement you can move in, Western theory. The root movement at the bottom for these first 2 chords is there to give a pseudo 2-5 effect. So it's there to trick us into thinking that we're hearing something we're used to, but when we get to the E major, we realize that we're not really in that type of land. In the next short section of the song, we land on a 4 chord, which is a very common chord to move to when you're moving across sections and songs. Harmonically, we have a simple walk down into the 3 and the 2 chord, which leads us into this E sus into the E major triad. This E sus to E major is a very common movement used to delay to us hearing the third of the E triad. Like I said before, this 3 is important because it's a leading tone. It leads up to the 1. So this sets us up perfectly to get back to the top of the song, which is A minor. The E triad is acting as what we would call a secondary dominant. This doesn't fit in the key of G, but it works because it's leading specifically into the A minor. Similarly to the backdoor 2-5, it's a momentary switch in key centers, but more in your face, unlike the backdoor 2-5. Melodically, it's playing off of the first motif of the song, with the reference with these large interval leaps. This just adds to the general continuity of the whole song, and then we have a scale walk up in the transition chord, just like the last motif of the last section, with just that main difference being that we finally resolved back on the 1 chord for that 2-5 instead of moving to the major 6. After looking through that song, we can definitely see how some of this can be tied back to Nami's character. Nami in general is a bubbly character with a good amount of energy, which is shown through the overall feel and groove of the song, but it's accompanied by light and sweet melody, which showcases Nami's inner and softer side. With the biggest relation being the backdoor 2-5, similarly towards like Nami's thief background and use of costumes and such. The backdoor 2-5 hits you in a place you never realized was there in the first place, just like how Nami would, sneak around and trick others. In all honesty, this theme had more than I thought it would after I finished analyzing it. I'm excited to see what the sad version has in store. Let's listen to it for a little bit. When talking about this second version of Nami's theme, it comes up early as a general theme, but I think its first time being played with, an attached importance was during episode 33, right after Nami, spoiler, faked Usopp's death, where she then talks a bit about her past as a way to lead into some, foreshadowing for the audience. Hearing this theme after just seeing Nami commit what we thought was, murder, allows the audience to wonder more about her motivations and thoughts, along with her foreshadowing the past. The first thing to notice about this song before we worry about the, straight melody or harmony is that it sits at a higher register and plays at a way slower BPM compared to the other song. BPM just means beats per minute, and it tells us how fast or slow that a song is going to be placed in. Usually we associate high pitches to being more, bright or joyful, but at this speed, putting the melody up an octave adds a tinge of, melancholy to what's happening overall. Getting past that, we start off with a short piano intro to set the tone. We start with some, chordal arpeggios that use perfect fourths and fifths to create like a hollow sound. A regular D minor arpeggio here could work, but it sound a bit too obvious versus the harmonically neutral sound of the chordal arpeggios. If we skip over to the 4th bar, we can already hear something interesting happening. We're in the key of D minor, which means we usually have 1 flat, which is B flat, but this G major 7 implies that we're using more of a Dorian sound, since instead of the B flat, we're using a B natural. Dorian is a brighter scale than a natural minor scale with the B flat, so that adds a bit of sweet melancholy to the sound also for the overall song, rather than trying to be hopelessly dark. But this chord goes a step further with having the major 3 of the scale, which is, borrowed from the parallel major of D minor. But the voicing for this major 7 chord keeps it from being like a happy bright to more of a shocking bright. This borrowing of the parallel major happens a lot in the song and adds a significant amount of color, which is then offset by the simple D minor triad. I often talk a lot in my other videos about how cool playing, extended seventh and ninth chords are, but this is one of those moments where the triad comes out on top. This simple three-note triad helps to add a more tasteful color than building up a seventh chord. The reason why is because the seventh minor chord isn't as dark as the triad. The higher you get up on the minor chord, the further you get away from the roots of what the minor sound is. This is because of how the seventh works with the other chord tones. If we had a D minor seventh arpeggio but took away the D from the root, we get a fully built F major triad. Because the F major sound is built into this D minor chord, it sounds brighter than just using the simple minor triad. Don't overthink it though. The composer probably wasn't worried too much about the semantics of his choice, but it most likely just sounded more tasteful to them. And I'm just simply explaining why the choice might have been made. Once we get past the D minor, we again encounter some more borrowed chords from D major, but they're both being voiced in a way that doesn't make them sound too major again. One of the highlights for me in this song is the simple voicing of this, D major 7 arpeggio. It starts on the 7th with C sharp, then to D, then to F sharp. This voicing is so special because of the interval relationships between all of the notes. C sharp and D are a half step between each other, and that causes an immense amount of tension. But then C sharp and F sharp are a perfect fourth away, which creates a certain, type of dissonance. But the interval between D and F sharp is a major third away, which is a very consonant interval. And it also voice leads great into the D minor because the C sharp wants to pull up into the D minor since it's a half step away. There is so much going on sound wise just between these three notes. And this voicing is also a demonstration of why more doesn't mean better. Though the harmony isn't playing any extensions, the melody is playing mostly the higher extensions of the chord. Before, since we were in the key of G and started on A minor, this E used to be the fifth, but now in D minor, it's the ninth, which is pretty high up from the root of D. The fact that it's actually literally further away makes the melody feel less centered in the harmony and creates a sound that's a bit detached compared to the original melody. If I made the melody more grounded with the harmony, it'd sound a bit more intimate. It wouldn't sound as, as bittersweet as it sounds now. This combined with the change in the harmony and scale degrees is how composers can take the exact same melodies with the same notes but change the feel of them. Melody is important, but harmony can shape the melody's identity of what's being played. After this first section is done, we hear a string ensemble to play the chords with the piano. But this time they add more extensions to what the piano had as a small contrast to the more dramatic color of the first simple triads. They play out the rest of the song and we end on a voicing that I was talking about before, almost as a bittersweet way to leave us wondering. I love One Piece, so this definitely won't be the last video I do about the series, and I definitely want to do more character themes like this video. Tell me below what was your favorite part about Nami's theme and other character themes you think I should do.